Hello, I'm Ken Kinsley, and this is Finding the Words, the only podcast devoted to text-based art and artists. When looking back at the history of text-based art, you could have some pretty spirited debates about who did this the best or who did that the best. It can be fun to debate where someone like Barbara Kruger or Tracy Emin fits into the pantheon. Is Ed Ruscha the godfather of text-based art? But there's one title that seems to me to be undisputed. For her unwavering positivity and commitment to social justice, the patron saint of text-based art would have to be Corita Kent, or as she was known in her days as a nun, Sister Mary Corita. I would venture to guess that she's probably even your favorite artist. In addition to being a professor at Immaculate Heart College, Corita created some of the most influential pop art serigraphs of the 1960s. After seeking dispensation from her vows, she continued to create several beloved series of works through the 1970s and into the 1980s until her passing in 1986. Today, the steward of her legacy is the Corita Art Center in Los Angeles, and I had a chance to talk to Nellie Scott, the Executive Director of the center. We discussed what drew her to the Corita Art Center, the history of Corita's artwork and its link to social practice art, how her art's messages work to promote community through the, as Nellie puts it, very democratic medium that is silk-screened, text-based pop art. We'll also get into the center's role in preserving Corita's legacy as an educator and artist. And there is a whole lot in store for the future of the center, which we will also dig into. Here's my discussion with Nellie Scott. Ms. Scott, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I have Nellie Scott, the Executive Director of the Corita Art Center, and you've been with them for 6 years now.
That's right.
And you were an independent consultant in New York for foundations and artists, institutions, estates. You even worked with Nathan Sawaya to get his life-size Lego people, the Park People project,
Oh,
started on the White House lawn.
yes, thank you. Yeah, I can't believe that was 8 years ago now. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
How did the Corita Center opportunity come up?
I'll be as radically transparent and vulnerable too. I think I'm a parent. I have young children. And there is a point that, we wake up and we read the morning headlines and we ask ourselves, what can we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And the opportunity to work with Corita's legacy, um, just what an honor, first of all, but also what a call to action she provides all of us, not only in her work, but her legacy. And I really, really valued that. Again, I have young children, and I look at them and I think about what world we're creating for them and what we're teaching them, and what we show up to do every day in service to others. So that's how I landed at, really, not only the Corita Art Center, but we oversee the Corita Kent estate. And when I say that, it really is her oeuvre and pedagogy that we champion in the world.
Yeah, and Corita's artwork and her history is kind of what makes the whole center possible. Just getting into some of her history, how did her early work had a lot of abstract expressionist take on like medieval art, really, and the church considered her depiction of the Holy Family to be blasphemous. What was it about that made them give her a rough time?
I know. I laugh because I think it's so, we have the vision to look back and go, "Wow, that's so silly. Didn't they know?" But yes, she received her master's in medieval art history and Byzantine art specifically, and you see that in a lot of her early 50s works really shine through as she's kind of thinking through the Holy Family and the figurative. Um, and I think that artists are here to vision a new kind of future for us, and sometimes that can be startling to people when they want it to look a certain way and feel a certain way, especially as it relates to anything religious or speaking of religious stories. And um,
Mhm.
And so she made a few pieces, and I don't know if it was so much just her artwork or the community itself, the order itself, and they were doing that really
Mm.
became the lightning rod for that conflict. And it's a very complicated story. But there's a documentary that's currently on HBO Max called Rebel Hearts that does a very good job of unpacking some of that tension that you mentioned between not only her artwork, but this larger movement for change.
Yeah, I have seen that, and if anybody is wondering when did nuns stop wearing the full habit, and when could the Immaculate Heart Order,
Yeah.
they were the ones that started. That was them who did that.
Well,
So,
they certainly were. I don't think they were alone in that, but I think that they were pioneers, and
yeah.
they really took Vatican II to heart and the opportunity to experiment on many levels, and one of those levels happened to be out of habit. And I think it's an incredible history, and I think that that film does a good job of telling, it's not just, this religious movement. I think underneath the surface is a labor movement and a feminist theology. They're really thinking
Mhm.
through what does it mean to show up, for each other, as a community. And, again, I think that film tells, an incredible tale of the people that were surrounding Corita. So I'm grateful to always talk about that because she does become a little bit of a monolith for those because she's so accessible and easy. But there's an incredible group of women that, we just keep wanting to shine a light on their stories too, like Anita Casper and Helen Kelly.
Yeah, her artwork kinda acts as
Yeah.
a billboard or a beacon for it, and it kinda stands out ahead of a lot of the other people. But, getting back to the early work and the church having a problem, how come they had such a problem with her depiction of the family, but they didn't seem as troubled by her using Wonder Bread as a metaphor for the Eucharist? Or were they?
Well, I don't I can't put myself in their shoes, and it's not.
Yeah.
And when I say they, it really was, the LA Archdiocese who was led by
Mhm.
Cardinal McIntyre at that time. I can't really speak to their opinions or reactions, but all I can say is that Corita kept showing up every day to create messages that aligned with the conversation she was having not only with her students but the larger community, and frankly that's many social movements as well. There is this letter that we have in our archive that they receive after a Mary's Day procession. So I know a lot of people like to think of her as this pop art nun, but I really think of her as a social practice artist. If Although we didn't quite have that category of language for her when she was working and
Mhm.
alive, because they, have this very dull black and white kind of day. Dull is maybe, summarizing it too simply, but, it certainly wasn't as colorful as it was when Karita takes a hold of it as the
Oh,
head
yeah.
art department. And, it blossoms, and there's this idea that, like, how do we create containers for dialogue and change? And they took this message of poverty and food insecurity to heart. Like, people are bringing food to donate at the altar, that they've created out of old grocery advertising, and it looks like a protest, but it's really a gathering to have conversations. How do we insert joy into these movements? Um, and it's such a beautiful, beautiful celebration. And there is a letter that we have in our archive that comes from the cardinal, um, that he misspells Crita's name. It's just like one of those small
That's
things where you're
that's your that's your first clue on where he's going with
oh,
everything.
yeah, maybe it really wasn't that big of a deal. Maybe it was just, an irritant. But, he calls, it essentially a fiesta in this letter. And, shortly thereafter, she makes a serigraph called, Bellbrand. But within that work, it says, "Happiness is a thing called fiestas." And, it's really subtle. It's just
Just
so
the
subtle.
minor dig there.
Just,
That's
like,
nice.
there's never this moment that although it would be very cinematic, movie scene, but there was never this high tension between her
Mm,
and, I think it was really, um, because she was working with so many incredible women that were also supporting her, that I don't know how much of that she quite frankly felt herself.
mm, mhm, mhm. And a lot is made out of her ordering a, do-it-yourself silk screen kit and teaching herself how to silk screen. This seems to surprise a lot of people, but does this just kinda speak to her upbringing?
Yeah, I think that this is why people, if you know, and you love Corita, you really love Corita, is because I think she speaks to a whole generation of doers and makers.
Mhm,
Um, and she does credits a few individuals to kind of teaching her the mechanics of silk screening. But she takes it up before she leaves at the University of Southern California. And there's these great stories of her going into the bathroom and printing on paper towels. And, I also think that that's a lesson in the ethos that, she does champion throughout her career is that, there isn't a hierarchy of imagery or a hierarchy of, like, the idea that a billboard advertisement or the packaging on, a loaf of bread, all of
mhm,
these things are things that we're taking in, and that looking and seeing are not the same thing. And so I do think that the silk screen process is such a democratic way of for her to work and create objects that represent the community and the art that they're making. I think she's really credited in so many. I mean, again, she's beloved by designers, graphic
Oh,
designers. I
yeah.
think everyone kind of really leans on her in that way. But I really think she was very purposeful um, with the way that she was using language and incorporating the typography. Like the language is her subject matter,
Mhm.
and it's a very democratic medium. Uh, you it's not a marble sculpture. You don't have to have an art history background to walk up to it and take something
Right.
away from it. There's something for everybody, and if you are religious, maybe you do see the bread packaging as the Eucharist and the breaking of bread and this kind of very, faith-based
Mhm.
ceremony that we can kind of, nibble at, but, um, if you're not, there's something there for you too, and I think that that's some of the magic of the bridge and a nod to really what was happening with Vatican II. Like, you can kinda
Mhm.
see where she's pulling from when she's doing that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, by the mid-60s, she's getting a lot more overtly political, and did the church again give her any rough time about that? Does
Again, it's so hard to say what was a rough
Mhm,
and what wasn't. I think, especially just in the era that she's working in, I try not to speak for her.
mhm,
I do look at it as though from the vantage point of hindsight is I think she's working within 2 systems to change systems.
mm,
And you have a system that she belonged within and her faith. Um, and then you also have the larger what's happening in the US and what's happening in Los Angeles politics. You see that I think more in her work, especially as it turns political, than anything, this sense of um again, but still very rooted in faith of, like, what does it mean to be a spiritual being having a human experience, and how do you show up for others? And I do think that aligns with a lot of the values of the church and the interpretations of the church, certainly. Now, does that always align with the leadership, that
mhm.
was at the LA Archdiocese? You know, we'll let the movie tell that tale, but I do think that it's bigger than that, and I think that she saw her art as a way of using her time and talents for the common good, and the way that that's expressed happens to be through these screen prints, at that time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now she had a lot of famous guests coming in to the art department because, she was not just for those who don't know, she was obviously a teacher, a professor at the college, Immaculate Heart College. Saul Bass, Alfred Hitchcock, Buckminster Fuller, John Cage, the Eames. Were they there to be inspired by her just as much as she was, have them talk to her students and learn from them?
I think it was just a really groovy mecca that I would
Yeah.
have loved to have been a fly on the wall for. Um, no, I think that I mean, I don't think it's too dissimilar from artists working today. We're inspired by others, we create community with others. We do wanna sit and listen at the feet of someone who's teaching us, and I think a really, great example of the way that they were thinking of the classroom, because you're right, she was an educator, and I think one of the incredible things she's left us is her pedagogy. Um, and of course her students who are still with us, who are
Mhm.
our champions, was the idea with the 10 rules. Their Bayless Glasscock's film actually captures some of the making of the 10 rules, and she enters into a classroom not as a hierarchy of like, I am your teacher, sit down, and this is all I have to say. There's a little of that, but
Mhm.
there's still like, how do we make this classroom together? How do I like, what does it mean to be an educator and what does it mean to be a teacher? And that way, she's not assuming that her students are coming in as empty vessels,
Mhm.
and they have something to teach her as well. And I think that that probably summarizes a little bit of the vibe of the classroom in the art department. Um, and so the lecture series that the people that you had mentioned took part of, that was also very much led by her mentor, Sister Mag, who, when you
Mhm.
see these juicy photos of them like riding camels and on
Yeah.
adventures, um, that was really Sister Mag's bring work too. So I want to bring her name into the space because
Mhm.
her legacy with the art department certainly kickstarted some of that.
Yeah, because she was kind of, Corita's mentor.
That's
Maybe
right.
not kind of, but she was Corita's mentor.
That's right. And how lucky, I wish to be a fly on the wall for so much of that. Corita also very much credits, the Eames and Charles Eames as
Mm.
really a teacher for her. I think, well, we know that he was on campus quite a bit. We have quite a few photos in our archives of both of them that are very lovely that we've recently digitized.
Oh, nice. I know that she, had a lot of people in there. How much was she in dialogue with the greater art world outside of Los Angeles?
Oh, very much so. I think because she's people really wanna just envision her in habit, as,
Mhm.
the pop art, but they were all over, and in some ways, I think
Mhm.
there's a larger conversation about, gender studies too, of, like, what spaces they were allowed in because they might have been
Mm.
that the other women who were working at that time were not allowed in, but I think that they were very much aware of what was happening in New York, and all over the US because they would go on these circuits, and they would be able to travel together and do that. So, again, we have photos of her visiting Rothko's studio in this. So
Mm.
she's very much well aware of what's going on. And I think that some of her early 60s works, why they may not be defined this way, I think you can see her hand very much present, this abstract expressionist kind of quality coming through. So I think she had more than a few influences.
Mhm. And how much was she influencing other people? I mean, she started silk screening before Andy Warhol. S
Well, I know everyone loves to pair the 2 of them together, and I think that's so fascinating because I think there's a juxtaposition, but I also think, um, she was very much part of the West Coast,
Mhm.
pop art movement, and, like, they all saw the Duchamp show together in Pasadena, the retrospective there, and they would have all been seeing the same things,
Mhm.
and, So I do think there's room for cross-pollination, like there is with artists working today. Um,
It is a lot easier today. You've got Instagram
that's
and,
right.
like, a lot, all of that. So it's in how much of it is, if you're on the West Coast, that's what you see, but apparently she was able to get out and, you know
That's right.
yeah.
We just opened an exhibit that's curated by my incredible colleague, Olivia Shaw, who's our senior curator, called Catching Sight. And it's a installation that's part of the Paris show that we just opened that actually has 80 35 millimeter slides with a projector
Mm.
as an a way of experiencing her photography. Um, and those photographs that Olivia has chosen are all about their travels in Europe too. And so you can see the way that she's looking, you can see the way that she's processing through this photography collection that's just beautiful. And so I think that those are all sources, right?
Mhm.
Sources can come from anywhere. And you see that in her work, right? She's
Oh, yeah.
appropriating.
Yeah, she's kind of a master appropriator,
That's right, that's right.
taking one thing and not just copying, but turning it into something totally new.
That's right, and I think she really does attribute, which I'm grateful for. When there's a quote in her work, she does her best to attribute that to the author.
Mhm.
In fact, she pulls sources from all over. There's interviews, right, from there's a work called Passion for the Possible. There's an interview that she pulls with, it's really beautiful piece, but it's from Playboy magazine. You know? And then you have the Beatles lyrics, and you have, really obscure publications she split. So she's really thinking about the language and the message as the hierarchy, not necessarily always the source.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now in her final years, she had moved to Boston. What drew her there?
She had a community there in Boston that
Mhm.
supported her, and yes, so she, seeks dispensation from her vows and ultimately, moves to Boston in 1968,
Mhm.
and I have to say some of her most political and charged and beautiful pieces. I know everyone loves the '60s, but I have a real big, soapbox for the '70s and '80s because I think that they're some of her most powerful work. Yeah, she does experience cancer and overcomes cancer and ultimately succumbs to it in 1986.
Mhm.
But I think that you can see with her work this, a little bit of introspection, but also, this honesty and transparency of, like, searching through her faith, searching through what it means to be a human. She's taking on commissions that, are really, really charged and socially active, and, I think that, again, I can't say this with certain because I haven't experienced it, but you do see artists who, um, when they're faced with mortality of their death, right? This idea
Mhm.
of, like, this sense of living, and what are we doing as we live, and, she really focuses a lot of her at the end of her life towards, anti-war and anti-nuclear war efforts and lending her work to, causes that she cares very deeply about, and I think that that period is so honest and beautiful, and, I'm always really glad when people get to spend some time with those works.
So, looking back at all of this sum of all of this history, kinda leads us to her legacy. Her style was constantly shifting. You got everything from kind of almost a German expressionist type look in the early '50s. It's very, layered. Eventually she gets the text in there, bright colors back to muted colors, the big blocky text into stuff that looks more watercolory. Is
Right.
there a style in there that is there a period in there that you would point to as classic Corita?
No.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really hard to because you're right, there are so many different chapters, like any artist, right?
Mhm.
There's always an extra chapter too. Um, I think what's so fascinating to me, I think her hand is always present, and I know that because of the graphic nature of the '60s work that sometimes that might feel lost, but it's actually quite there. So when you see that the way that the text has been manipulated, her process, right? She takes the headline, she tears it out of the magazine, she physically crumples that, she photographs, projects, and then includes it in the screen. And so while her early '50s works and certainly her later works where she's watercolor, which are just so
Oh yeah.
beautiful, um, her hand is still very much present in the way that she's working with the language as a subject matter. And then I think there's at a point where it almost feels as though she's reporting the news there in the
Hmm.
'60s. Um,
Yeah, with literally the newspapers. I
With
mean,
yeah, with
that's
using
going
media.
into yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't think so. I think, I see the through lines and threads, but maybe that's because I'm so tunnel visioned into this incredible collection that we have, and, super sleuthing, piecing the dots through the archives of like, "Ah, this makes sense of why this is this way." Um, I think that there's an openness to curiosity that I
Mhm.
think and a message. I think that's classic Corita, whether it's a commission she's putting in a magazine or something that is very subdued watercolor that it reminds you to be present, it's really about the message.
And she was very well known in her time. I mean, she was on the cover of Newsweek at one point. She did the love stamp in, I wanna say 1983.
85?
85, yes, maybe she got the commission in '83. The Vatican Pavilion for the '64 New York World's Fair.
Yeah.
Um, she's definitely now making a comeback, but
Yeah.
she kind of fell out of the public consciousness in a sense for quite some time. Why do you think that was?
Well, I'm probably not a very good interviewee. Ask a question, you to give you a question back is like, well, why does that happen with so many women artists, period?
Mhm, mhm,
What I think is unique is that when she passed, she left her personal papers to Harvard and
mm,
a collection of work to the Grunwald, that is now the Hammer Museum. And then everything came to the Immaculate Heart community, and they founded Corita Art Center. And at the time of that founding, it was predominantly women that were this kind of collective group that said, "You're not going to forget her. She belongs to a next generation." And they've kept this collection together, and I think that that is what now is a privilege for us as the center to build upon. So I think it's a very unique circumstance that you see,
mhm.
because that's really not the case always, with so many, incredible artists over time.
And she was many things. We kinda talked about
Yeah.
this already, an educator, an artist, she was an activist. It's probably impossible to separate these things, but do you think one of these stands out as or should stand out as her main legacy?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I think that her artwork she's an artist.
Mhm,
Through and through. She's an artist. Was as far as her legacy is concerned, she's an educator, um, because that is the work that we
mhm,
have as Corita Art Center, right? And thinking through this incredible, pedagogy that she left us is, how we think through arts education and supporting others, so it's a hard thing to separate the 2, but I think that always, forevermore, she's an artist first.
mhm.
And artists are really the great visionaries of a world that we all wanna live in, and so, I really think that that's what makes her so, dynamic.
And I guess this is where the Corita Center comes in
Yeah.
because you are the main custodians of that legacy. What do you see your main role at the center as being?
Well, we are the great I mean, the privilege to work with what
Sure.
I call a living legacy, and it's not as much as our whole world is Corita, it's about how do we take the ethos that she left us, which is very clear, championing love and justice and hope and inspiring others to do and make. Um, that's that is the charge that we have, as an organization to show up in every which way you can imagine. So we're a little bit of everything. We are very much a collection. We have a very robust collection of artworks, objects, ephemeral material, archival material that we care for, that we loan for, that we make available to researchers. Um, and then we're also very much the artist estate where we are thinking through like, great, what would a children's book about her look like so that we can
Hmm.
share more about her to a different
Oh.
generation. Um, and then we are very solidly 2 feet in the ground, an arts nonprofit. How do we create adaptable model, and how do we think of the new space that we're opening this next March, as a container for dialogue and ideas and creativity that responds to the now. So that's when I say living legacy. We have a few different buckets that and little hats that we get to wear. Um, but I can't imagine a person that deserves more attention than her, because she really truly she showed up for others her entire life.
Hmm.
And we just get to continue that.
And you touched on you are now the center is currently closed, am I correct?
That's right.
Okay, you're reopening March of '25 in the downtown LA Arts District. Having the center at Immaculate Heart High School for so long seemed very fitting. What were the main considerations in leaving?
Well, there was a few. I mean, of course, we are so tied to her studio, which is separate property across the
Mm,
street,
mhm,
which we were thrilled to get historical cultural monument status in Los Angeles. And we'll continue working on that as our hope is to put a national designation in for that very humble and sweet studio space that really brought a lot of people together to say that this is quite an important space. So to say that our ties to that corner in Western and Franklin are still very much there. We had a real consideration for the collection. We have a stewardship responsibility for works on paper that require an HVAC system that we can,
mhm,
watch the condition and the climate that we are creating for those works. So we had a very practical reason in the collection care. But quite frankly, the overarching one was, how do we share her? How can we make ourselves accessible? And so this new space will allow us to host student groups really for the first
mm.
time. It's not just a high school hallway that you have to hopefully, don't bump into anything as you back
And
up.
and it was not as
Yeah.
somebody who my daughter just graduated this year last year from Immaculate Heart, so I've spent more than a little time over there, and I can tell you it was not necessarily the easiest spot to get into if you weren't like, if you had to go over there anywhere during your pickup time, you're not getting in
No,
in
you're
there.
definitely not, you never
It's not
know.
happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can
Um,
understand that.
and I think that there is she belongs to all of us, and she belongs to the city of LA. And the opportunity to allow others to have a state of discovery if they don't know who she is, what a privilege for us, but also a responsibility for us to make it as accessible as possible. And so we were really excited. We're hoping, funding pending. We want to stay free and open to the
Hmm,
public. We want to make sure that we are removing as many barriers. And, we have a history of developing curriculum, and we've got a whole suite of curriculum that we're working on right now to go for the first show, which will be a set of heroes and sheroes that she made in 1968 and 69, that will ultimately be a touring university exhibition. So
hmm.
the many hats that we wear, it becomes an opportunity to open the doors, and I think that we really feel strongly that this space, is defined by the community that, uh, gets to use it and love it and think on it, and the programming has to be adaptable to be of service. So this will be the first time that our organization has been able to open the doors in that way, and it's exciting. It's a little daunting and nerve-wracking, but I trust that, gosh, we're just so rich in people, and I can't wait to tell that part of the story of everyone that's gathered to make this space so special.
And it clearly is going to, expand the mission. Do you think it's gonna change the mission at all?
No,
Yeah.
I don't see that
Yeah.
changing. I feel like we're so our mission's at such a North Star for us. In fact, not to quote, one of our board members, but I think the way that we've been thinking about it, which is, what is the fire that we are asking others to warm their hands by?
Hmm.
And if we stay focused on just building that fire, others will join and others will come around, and we build community that way, and it's authentic community. And um, the work that we do, um, it spans so many different categories that the only word I can use is it's adaptable. It's meant to meet people where they're at.
Mhm.
And that has evolved, whether it's COVID or, you know, responding to the now, which is, us living in 2024. And we have, uh, um, I think it's fair to say a loneliness epidemic too. And how do we build community and spaces for community?
So what is the best way for somebody, whether they're here in Los Angeles or outside of the Los Angeles area, to get involved with the center?
Oh, well, right now it would be to follow us and join our mailing list because we will have not only many celebrations forthcoming for the new year, but lots of calls for volunteers as we open the space. So there will be many hearts and many hands that make this open the way that we hope and dream it will. So just signing up on our mailing list is always a great one.
When you say volunteers, what does that entail for people?
Oh boy, raise your hand, we're gonna put you to work. For example, we have Corita Day, which is November 20th this year.
Mhm.
We always take that opportunity to gather folks to build art kits that we then distribute, and those art kits are filled with not only art supplies and curriculum, but also some food too, some snacks, because you can't make if you're hungry. And we get those distributed out through our nonprofit partners across LA. And I fill my little Prius up and I go around to as many places as I can. But so there's volunteer opportunities such as that. There's other volunteer opportunities that we see forthcoming, not only around just art art workshops and supporting different programming for CAC.
Very nice.
Yeah.
That's great. So, Corita Day, I know you said it's November 20th. It's her birthday has been proclaimed a day in both Los Angeles and, Boston,
That's right.
and, now you have an event coming up for Corita Day, am I correct? On
That's right.
the 23rd, right?
It will be on the 23rd. We're doing it we're co-hosting with the Philosophical Research Society
Mhm.
in Los Feliz. We look forward to maybe hosting Creta Day in our new home next year. But in the meantime, this year, we're so grateful for our neighbors and partner organization to put together something really special. I'm quite excited. We have a new book coming out by Dan Paley that we'll be
Mm.
launching this next month in November. He'll be doing a book reading. Of course, we've got lots of holiday goodies always to purchase. And then a film screening of two historical films by Thomas Conrad and Bayless Glasscock that
Mm.
a lot of individuals have never seen, and they're delightful. along with Mandy Kahn, who's curated a group of 14 artists who are responding in different ways in kind of conversation with Corita and inspired by Corita. So it's going to be a love fest.
Wow. Yeah. That is quite a lot.
It is. It's a full
That's
day.
excellent.
We are ambitious folks. I think about I think about all of the incredible people that come around the table to make Corita Day happen all over the US and quite frankly the world. It has kind of caught on as a day of service. And so we have seen um, at least through social media, we've seen educators celebrating in their classrooms by making. We've seen food drives. We've seen zine making. We've seen everything in her honor. Poster making for perhaps protests. Like it there's quite a lot out there that it's not driven by us. It's driven by others who are really inspired, and that is the good stuff.
Well, Nellie, thank you so much for organizing all of this and kind of spearheading this movement.
Yeah. I guess so. Yes.
Oh, I know so.
Yeah.
Nellie, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that is it for today's episode. A big thank you to Nellie Scott once again, and for everybody at the Corita Center for all their help in putting this episode together. And of course, thank you to you for listening. If you are in the Los Angeles area on Saturday, November 23rd, 2024, Corita Day is from 3 to 9 p.m. at the Philosophical Research Society. Tickets as of this recording are still available for the ticketed event from 7 to 9. So check out corita.com for tickets. Hope to see you there. Thank you very much. See you next time.